Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. It is Sandy and Sean. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. Danny Bailey is the man making all of this work behind the scenes. Thanks for joining us today on Mile High Sports. We'll start with the Denver Broncos. Sandy, minicamp is still underway. The last one before Mandor should say minicamp. Slightly different. OTAs are underway. Organized team activity.
I understand how they become interchangeable.
Right. The mini camp is next week. More on that in a moment. The last OTA before mandatory mini camp for the Broncos. And we'll take a look at the Denver Broncos. But we're going to start with a player that is no longer on the Denver Broncos. That was the best player on the Denver Broncos. And that was one Justin Simmons, who still at this point is not signed. And I'm a little surprised and confused as to why. Obviously, the salary cap dictates a lot of this, as well as roster and personnel for all the teams that may be looking for a safety. But given the reality of what Simmons has accomplished since coming into the league in 2016, I'm a little stunned that he's still available.
5 reasons.
Sure.
That work for you?
Okay.
Five reasons.
That seems pretty good.
Maybe we can branch off into even a few more than that. But these are the 5 things that come to mind for me. One, the obvious devaluing of the safety position. Justin Simmons is not the only veteran safety proven valuable to his team or teams in prior years who remains unsigned.
Right.
There are several of them still out there, including Justin Simmons. Reason number 2, he's never played in a postseason game.
Well, that's not his fault.
His fault, but if you're the leader for 8 years and you're associated with a losing team, and I'll get to the real reasons in just a moment. Really, it's just one as to why that has happened. And Simmons has been a victim as opposed to a perpetrator of this colossal post-Super Bowl title failure that has enveloped the Broncos since 2015. Reason number 3, no injuries in the offseason among safeties around the league.
Okay.
There may be some in training camp. There may be some during the first month of the season. He may need something like that in order to garner interest. I think in any case, the most he can hope for is a 1-year deal.
Wow.
Maybe a 2-year deal. Maybe a 2-year deal, but most likely a 1-year deal. Reason number 4, at the age of 30, I know he's a safety and not a corner.
Right.
But he is on the cusp of what are generally considered to be declining years for a defensive back in general and a football player at any position in particular. And reason number 5 gets back to reason number 2, which you rightly objected to, organizational incompetence for 8 years. He's been a victim of that.
Yes.
More than a perpetrator, more than a cause of Denver's failure. 8 straight years out of the playoffs, 7 straight losing seasons. Those 5 reasons come to mind. I imagine if he's gotten offers, they've been of the low ball variety, and that's fine for teams that are healthy. And generally during the offseason, with a few exceptions, teams stay healthy. There's no on-field contact work permitted in the offseason around the National Football League with any of these OTAs, and even for the minicamp, which is mandatory, there is no on-field contact. That has to come in training camp. The Broncos were able to free up some $14.5 million against the salary cap by releasing Justin Simmons. So far, the Broncos look pretty good. And I would say for the most part, interest in Justin Simmons would come more likely from an NFC team than an AFC team.
Why is that?
We mentioned Detroit the other day. A lot of cap room.
Mm-hmm.
Place like Philadelphia, Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator now.
Is it also because the NFC is a little more wide open?
Yeah.
There are maybe more teams that might be in the mix?
That may also be the case. Less top-heavy. Although the AFC is overall the better conference, I think the NFC is less top-heavy. We mentioned Detroit, Philadelphia. Defensive backs coach is Christian Parker, who was coaching Simmons in Denver for several years on various coaching staffs. And a team like Atlanta with Raheem Morris as the coach.
Reinventing themselves with Kirk Cousins after throwing a lot of money that way.
And maybe looking for a little bit of leadership on a defense that was not very good last year. Those three teams come to mind for me, and they're all NFC teams.
I'm still sort of flabbergasted by the idea that Justin Simmons can't land a gig. I mean, when you think about the numbers over the course of his career, third round pick back in 2016, he's played 118 games for the Denver Broncos. That's the 50th most in team history, which you think, okay, 50, but that's over the entire history of the team. His solo tackles, 443. You don't put combined tackles because they didn't keep track of that forever. 12th all time for the Broncos. The 30 interceptions, tied for 7th all time with Dennis Smith in Broncos history. But most importantly, those 30 interceptions lead all NFL players, cornerback safe, period, all NFL players since he entered the league. And injuries have not been a major part of his career. There was a concern last year, but he came back and was durable. There wasn't any concern there. Otherwise, he'd been remarkably durable at one point, not missing a snap over multiple seasons. There is no question about the character of the man, as good a person who's ever put on a Denver Broncos uniform. If you add Justin Simmons to your team, you're not going to disrupt your locker room. You're not going to worry about someone who will embarrass your franchise. You're not going to worry about someone who fans won't like or appreciate. You're not going to worry about someone who isn't going to bring professionalism and effort. Justin Simmons clicks every single one of those boxes. And so the idea that nobody at this point wants a player of that caliber, and I do get the idea you have, Sandy, and it's obviously the case, or you'd have a job. The teams look around and say, well, he hasn't been a winner. Okay, but don't they look at the Denver Broncos and think the Broncos haven't been a winner? It's not necessarily him.
Of the prices you pay when your team is irrelevant and has been irrelevant for many, many years. The price you pay is that your best players are caught up in that failure, whether that failure is fairly attributed to them or not. They're caught up in it. And other teams look at the safety position and say, well, okay, we see the numbers, obviously, 30 interceptions during the course of his career. We see all that, but how is it translated? How good has Denver's defense been for most of that time, even with defensive-minded head coaches? Vance Joseph, Vic Fangio. The two most recent, of course, have been offensive-minded head coaches. But to expect other teams to look at Denver last year, what they're going to see and what is fairly observed might be two different things. They're going to see 70 points given up against Miami. Yes, Justin Simmons did not play in that game. He was injured. But that game sticks out for people. And he did play most of the games last year. Mm-hmm. The Bronco defense was, of course, better. It could hardly have been worse once Simmons came back into the lineup, but it was still not a premier defensive team. They played that way from time to time. But for a lot of teams, and again, it's free agency and it's the offseason, and you're not desperate for talent at this point. Everybody has hope. Everybody goes through the free agency process. Everybody goes through the draft, and teams are more comfortable, I think, these days selecting safeties in the draft. And by the way, safeties this year were not selected early and often in the NFL draft, but still teams are more comfortable selecting safeties, developing those players, as opposed to giving big money to safeties on the free agent market. Name me the last time a safety got big money in free agency. You have to look pretty hard. It is much the same as the fullback position is on the offensive side of the ball. When not so far back, we saw a slew of running backs, including the defending rushing champion, Josh Jacobs, fail to receive any kind of offer. And now, of course, he's with another team, but last year, he and Saquon Barkley of the Giants had to sort of come crawling back and take what they were given.
Yeah.
And well below what would have been considered market value for running backs 5 years ago.
Josh Jacobs now with the Green Bay Packers. That's an interesting position to follow there, because we know the way the Packers finished under Jordan Love. But when you look at the safety situations, it's interesting. I want to give you an opportunity to hear a little bit. Justin Simmons, of course, we talked about the person he is. A lot of time at his own, working on many charities at his own charity event recently. He had an opportunity to reflect a little bit on his time as a Denver Bronco.
My biggest reflection when I look back is that I'm just disappointed that I didn't see this thing through, and I personally couldn't get us. And I'm not playing all 11 positions on both sides of the field. It's a team game, but personally, I couldn't be there to get us through and get back to the postseason. And so, but I know that's something that will happen. There's great players, great leadership, great coaching in the building. And so that'll happen sooner rather than later. And when it does, it'll be a special feeling around here. And I'm really excited for those guys.
First, obviously, that's my mistake. That comes from Pat Surtain charity event is where Simmons was at. He was at Pat Surtain's charity. Second, you did notice maybe for the first time in Simmons' career pointed out, I can't play all 11 positions. I didn't play all 11
Although
positions.
They've come pretty close to letting him try.
They have tried.
In years past, because they've had him covering anyone and everyone, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers.
Playing in the slot. Well, normally a slot reserved
normally
for
a cornerback is assigned to that
versatile,
particular
durable
kind of duty.
But deep, but you're talking about safety, Sandy. How about this? 5 guys that made roughly $10 million or more still sitting out there. Names Micah Hyde, 33 years old, but he can still play. Quandre Diggs out there made $13 million for Seattle. He's still sitting out there. Eddie Jackson at one point signed the biggest safety contract in history with Vic Fangio.
Maybe the answer to my question.
Perhaps sitting out there still, even a little bit younger than Simmons. Simmons is out there, and Jamal Adams, who isn't even 29,
but can't cover. See, he's kind of the antithesis of Simmons.
Right.
He's known as a blitzer, a little more like Brandon Jones, the recently acquired safety from Miami, who is now in Denver. And the idea is that if a safety can cover, maybe he doesn't play the run very well. If he plays the run well, then maybe he doesn't cover. That's Jamal Adams, who is not considered a particularly effective cover guy. In this day and age, if you're in the defensive secondary, regardless as to whether you're a cornerback or a safety, you have to be able to cover.
Yeah,
to really get big money. And the Jets lost Adams to Seattle and really haven't missed him all that much. And Seattle, more importantly, didn't benefit that much from having Jamal Adams. So the difference with Adams got hurt.
Right.
Simmons never gets hurt, except for a brief period of time last year. He's hardly ever missing games. You mentioned, a 2-year stretch where he played every snap.
Every snap. Never came off the field. So, remarkable. And that's life in the NFL comes at you fast. You're talking about a guy that was a all-pro and now isn't even on a team and may have to wait even for the season to start.
I thought he was the Broncos MVP last year.
Me too.
I don't think there was even any question, no doubt whatsoever about that. And one other quick point, which Troy Renk brought out in his fine column today in the Denver Post. You got a sense of the class of Justin Simmons listening to that soundbite a few seconds ago. Justin Simmons has come by the facility and thanked anyone and everyone for what they did for him during his time in Denver. And even in that soundbite, you didn't hear him talking about his own interests. You heard him forecasting, as he always has, bright days ahead for the Denver Broncos. I don't know that that makes him an accurate forecaster,
so far, not
but it
so
shows
much,
the class of the man. And in the end, that's the most important.
He had a year left on his 4-year, $61 million deal when the Broncos decided to move on. Here's hoping some NFL team gets their heads in the right spot and adds not only a top-tier player, but a top-caliber person to go along with that player. Want to remind you a little bit that coming up in just about a month is the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest at the Douglas County Fairgrounds. That'll be happening on Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors will be on site, including more than 50 whiskey vendors. You can try all sorts of different varieties. The festival will take place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Features live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter. Tickets are available online, and if you use promo code MHS, for Mile High Sports, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. And if you're 21 and up, get your tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. Remember to use promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets at the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. Coming up fast, the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest. Check it out at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. MHS for $15 off. Well, we talk about the situation for Justin Simmons, Sandy. The situation with Courtland Sutton is a little different. He's still signed by the Denver Broncos. He has $2 million left of guaranteed money on a contract that might otherwise pay him $35 million over the next 2 years. But even though he has far more leverage than people suggest, it's amazing. Listening to a lot of other players around town, like Sutton has no leverage. He can't do anything. He has to come back. That's not true. He does. He has quite a bit of leverage. That said, is the Simmons story a cautionary tale? Because even though Courtland Sutton did have 10 touchdown catches last year, good for 6th in the league, he has had an injury history far more checkered than Justin Simmons. He has not had the same career that Justin Simmons had. He's also a victim of the Broncos' lack of success. But if Justin Simmons finds himself out there in free agency with no suitors, that's a big risk for Courtland Sutton. Is that enough that if you were Courtland Sutton, you'd think, I'd probably better just report I've taken this as far as I can go?
For the most part, my sense is that Justin Simmons, especially at the age of 30, wants to go to a contending team. So you wonder why he hasn't been signed in free agency. He doesn't want to go to the Tennessee Titans, I assume. I doubt he would be thrilled about going to the New York Giants.
Yeah, he's a BC guy,
or
go
even
back
the
to the
Washington
Patriots or something.
Commanders.
Right? Yeah, you're not going to do
the
that.
New England Patriots. He wouldn't go to teams like that. The problem for Courtland Sutton isn't one of leverage so much as it is the idea that, again, based on his production here, and he's 4 years removed from the ACL surgery.
Mm-hmm.
But given the amount of time he's had to regain pre-ACL form, he seems to have settled in as a number 2/number 3 wide receiver for a good team. And much like Simmons, I can't imagine that Courtland Sutton would want to go to a bottom 10 team, a team that more closely resembles or might even be worse than the Broncos.
Right.
So the teams who are true contenders limit Courtland Sutton's viability. We have both said that we think an ideal trade partner might be the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Right.
They have his quarterback over the last 2 years, Russell Wilson. They have a coach in Mike Tomlin who one way or the other gets teams into the playoffs, most often by fashioning winning seasons from teams that for most other coaches would be lucky to win 6 games, 7 games out of 17. He gets them into the playoffs. I don't know exactly how the Steelers view their wide receiver situation. I would think, at least on paper, it might make sense for the Steelers to trade for Justin Simmons, and I don't think it would
So
take
for Courtland
a lot
Sutton.
to get him. I'm sorry, for Courtland Sutton.
They
I
could
don't
sign
think it
Simmons.
would take.
Wouldn't hurt that either.
Well, yeah, but they're pretty well stocked
Right.
back there. And I do think a trade is in the offing. I think actually Sean Payton got off one of his better lines yesterday when asked about whether he thinks Sutton will report next week and why he hasn't been around. And I think his answer, certainly clever, demonstrating a sense of humor we don't often see from Sean Payton,
Right,
is maybe a little bit of a hint as to how dispensable versus indispensable Courtland Sutton is to the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, Sean Payton had a chance to talk about the idea when asked if he was going to report. And more importantly, the question was about, is the reason he hasn't reported had to do with unhappiness with his contract. And here's what the Broncos coach said.
Yeah, I think he'll be here for minicamp. I mean, it's mandatory. And when I've been asked about Courtland, I'm going to say this, man, I just know his work ethic. I know the player. And, you know, there's a list of things that race through your mind this time in the offseason as a head coach. And respectfully when I say this to him, because he and I have talked, I think that'll work itself out. So,
No, it goes on to point out that it's he wasn't upset with the Broncos' new uniforms. Put it that way.
That's probably not the reason he
Yeah,
hasn't
it's
been
not the
around.
reason.
It's probably not his disdain for the new uniform
Right.
the Broncos have, which, by the way, seem to be
Look, somewhat
looked upon
similar.
with disdain by many of the fans who haven't been
They're fine.
necessarily thrilled.
They're fine.
I think it's nonsense that they changed it, by the way. If they aren't better, why change them? And most fans that I've talked to, of course, maybe my group of sources among those in the fan base are a little more cynical about these things, but they can't stand the new uniforms. And I don't know if that's associated with the cynicism that is otherwise infected the view of the Broncos among many of their fans. You know what I think fans are tired of, in all seriousness? I think
Losing?
the fans are tired of being promised something new and better, up to and including uniforms which aren't new, in the sense that wow, that's
more or less the
that's
same
amazing. Thing. It's the same thing, with minor variations, and it's not better. And Bronco fans are tired of being told, you have to love us, you have to believe in us, because whether it's a player or new uniforms, it's going to be better. And even maybe subconsciously, Justin Simmons plays into that when he says, well, it'll be sooner rather than later. We've been hearing that the Broncos will improve, right? Sooner rather than later. Bronco fans have been hearing that for 8 years now. Oh, it'll be sooner rather than later. The only winning season they had during that 8-year stretch was the only year, and I mean the only year, that the Broncos didn't trumpet from the rooftops the idea that they would be better than they were the year before. It was the only year, and it was only that way because there were Super Bowl champions in 2015, and they couldn't possibly be better than that. You can't do better than win the Super Bowl in 2016. So there was an allowance as to how they might slip a bit, and they did, but only by 3 games, and they were 7-3 at one point, well on their way to another 12 or 13 win season, it appeared. And then they slipped at the end of the year. In 17, they promised they would be better. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. And here again in 24, we will be better because we have new, fresh talent. And now that burden is placed, and not without some pressure, in my view, that burden has been placed on Bo Nix.
You mentioned the idea you think a trade might be in the offing here with
right.
Courtland Sutton, and when you're talking about the idea of mandatory
out with the old, in with the
mandatory, Sutton, you think that there's some sort of little back channel communication that don't make a stink, show up, we're going to find a trade for you, and,
could be,
and we'll go from there.
I mean, they keep saying they're talking. Peyton says just now he's spoken with Sutton.
And the Broncos have said all offseason he's in a good place.
Peyton has spoken with him. I don't believe this good place stuff. I mean, I think the honesty and the humor came through in Peyton's acknowledgement that he's not here because he doesn't
more
like
money,
the uniforms.
And the Broncos
Everybody
probably
knows
aren't
why
going to give him more money.
Here.
Right.
But what also occurs to me is that Peyton and Michael Thomas were a part of a similar situation a few years back, and a relationship between the two that was once quite close became hostile.
Right. Exactly.
Overnight.
Those are things that can be concerns. Who knows how it will shake out.
And the Saints won a lot more with Michael Thomas than the Broncos won with Courtland Sutton.
Yes.
Who has never played for a winning team here in Denver.
The next question then would be about Bo Nix. How much do you think the difference between having a veteran player in Sutton who has had the touchdown numbers, who has been a good, if not great player, a number 2 guy, if you don't have him, how much does it set Bo Nix back? If at all, I guess I would argue it probably does. But at this point, I think that Sutton's explosiveness has, if not vanished, it's decreased a lot. He is a guy that runs good routes. He has outstanding hands. He has a knack for the clutch catch, especially in the end zone. And he showed that last year. But I think when you look at it on the whole, and you look at what the Broncos are trying to build under Sean Payton, if Tim Patrick is healthy, you have that in Tim Patrick already, who's already re-signed to a new, much friendlier deal, 1 year, $2 million. You just added Troy Franklin. You signed Josh Reynolds. I think Sean Payton has already mentally decided, I don't need Courtland Sutton. If he shows up and agrees to the deal we have, then that's great. We'll keep him around. If he doesn't, we don't need him. I have other options.
I think that's the complete and total truth of the matter. I think the Broncos
does it make a difference to Nix at all?
I doubt it. What does Bo Nix know about Courtland Sutton other than reading about his stats? I don't
doesn't know him otherwise because they haven't been in the building together.
Never played together. They haven't been together during these OTAs where we keep hearing, hey, at certain positions, there's a chance for growth. I mean, the Broncos are even praising Zach Wilson, who from all public indications, what little the media is able to observe of various practice sessions, he's been awful. And they're praising him. So
because everyone looks good at this phase.
Not Zach Wilson. No. And they still praise him, even though people have seen him look terrible. Not bad, terrible. As every bit as incompetent as he was with the Jets. Sean Payton talks with more respect about Courtland Sutton than he does about many of the players he inherited. But just compare the way he talks about Bo Nix to the way he talks about Courtland Sutton or most any other Bronco veteran he inherited.
Sean Payton guy.
Bo Nix and others are people who have been associated before, coaches and players, with Sean Payton. He speaks favorably about them, and sometimes not directly, but at least by implication, not nearly as favorably about others.
Well, the OTAs will get underway today and tomorrow. They'll wrap up tomorrow, and then minicamp will be the mandatory minicamp. We'll find more out about the Sutton situation will be next week. The Colorado Rockies having more than a little bit of difficulty at home against the Cincinnati Reds. More about that in a minute, but first a message from our friends at Senior Hardin Law.
No one ever plans to be part of a car accident, and no one plans on getting hurt in a car accident. But if you do sustain a major injury, you need help. You need the best legal advice out there. You need an attorney. You need the best, and you need to call Zahner Harden Law. Kurt Zahner and Mark Harden are the kinds of lawyers you want handling your case. Two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado, decorated and celebrated many times over. They've appeared in the Denver Post, local news channels, and even Good Morning America. These guys handle the most important cases. They work tirelessly to make our community a safer place. With multi-million-dollar verdicts, it's rare that a law firm is respected by insurance companies, right? But these two are, and we're lucky to have them in our own backyard. If you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zahner Harden Law at yourstorywill-be-told.com. That's yourstorywill-be-told.com.
The Colorado Rockies, they're finishing up their series with Cincinnati in a matinee game on a Wednesday. But last night, something happened that almost hadn't happened in a long time. Frankie Montas came in for the Reds and was just dealing 7 innings and 7.1 really at the end of one hit ball. But he took the no-hitter into the 7th inning at Coors Field. That has not happened for a long time. Elias Diaz broke it up with a double to center field in the 7th. Then Montas went and got the next a handful of batters there. But Montas was asked about the idea of if he was aware of the no-hitter. He said, quote, "If I said no, I'd lie. If I had thrown a no-hitter, that would be dope. My arm is feeling really good." I guess. I mean, the Rockies are not the 27 Yankees, okay? Don't get me wrong.
And Montas is not even the ace of the Cincinnati staff,
right?
Which is not exactly replete with talent in the starting rotation. But he was amazing last night, and he brought back memories of some other pitchers, some of whom are well known and some not so well known, who have pre-humidor and post-humidor spun effective games with their pitching repertoire at Coors Field. It is not a common thing, even with the Rockies at times looking like the hitless wonders.
Mm-hmm.
And he simply overpowered them, I thought, last night, and had pretty good control.
High 90s stuff.
1 or 2, but he's throwing high 90s. He's throwing 2 different types of sliders.
96 pitches, 63 strikes.
That's very good. He did not have trouble finding the strike zone, and he kept the Rockies off balance and guessing. The Rockies, by the way, didn't touch up the bullpen all that much more than they had gotten to Montas, and they finished with 1 run on 3 hits and yet another loss to a losing team, yet another loss to a last-place team, meaning the Rockies have won 1 game this year against a last-place team. They were swept by Miami. They may be in the process. We'll check on how they're doing today of being swept by Cincinnati.
So good, but who knows what it means. But Ryan McMahon talked about it after the game, talked about Montas and said he did a really good job mixing it. He stayed out at the heart of the plate. When a guy is throwing 97 with a good mix of pitches, it's a tough one to cover. He was changing the shape on his sliders, and they were all coming out pretty similar. So for the Rockies, I get it. Every once in a while, you're running into the hot guy, but the Rockies have done a better job of not really getting shredded in the strikeout category. Yesterday, 2 walks in total, 12 Ks, only 3 hits. They just couldn't put the bat on the ball. The only guys that did were Diaz, who went 2 for 4, and Brendan Rodgers, who again, that's 12 out of 13 games in which he has a hit, goes 1 for 4. That's not spectacular, but when the rest of your team can't get more than 2 other hits, it's not that bad. But this was just a tough one, and McMahon in particular would know. 0 for 3. 1 walk, 3 Ks.
The Rockies now have won more games, though they played only 22 of them. More wins against winning teams than they have against losing teams, against whom they have now played 38 games.
Well, I spoke
22 against winners, 38 against losers, and they have more wins against winning teams, 11-10. They're 10-28 against losing teams. It is a stunning little factoid that to me still places, though they have a slightly better record because they played 1 fewer game, they have 1 fewer loss than the Miami Marlins, but they have to be the worst team in the National League, and that's with a fairly successful month of May in back of them.
Yeah.
Of course, the June swoon seems
Legendary.
to be well underway with the Rockies, who have not won a game yet this month.
And in literally the last couple of minutes, when we started this part on the Rockies just a couple of minutes ago, the Rockies were up 4-1. That was,
Well, that was 30
the
seconds
Rockies
ago.
season, right? That was a whole a few minutes ago. It's now 4-4 for the Rockies, so we'll find out how that goes along. Diaz with a double thus far, at least continuing to go, and then Rogers with a hit as well, 2 RBI for the Rockies thus far too. But yeah, it's Cincinnati is a last place team in the Central, but they are a last place team that is 5 games under 500. Might be 4 by the end of the day, but that's it. The Rockies are 18 under 500. And the amazing part is you take out the Marlins, who are 19, as you mentioned, but slightly different. So now the Rockies and Marlins might, at least after this afternoon, have identical records. The rest of the National League is all in that mix. The Central, Milwaukee leads, but the worst team is Cincinnati, 5 games under 500. The Giants are the 4th worst team in the NL West. They're in 4th place. They're only 4 games under 500. The Mets, off to a really bad start, are 4th worst in the NL East, and they're 9 games under. But for the most part, everybody except for your Mets, your Rockies, and your Marlins are half a dozen or games within half of the 500 mark.
You won't have it, most likely won't have it in the American League this year, but in the National League, and I'm not necessarily opposed to adding one team to the playoffs, although it does bring baseball now up to 12, when baseball used to always boast about how compared to the other sports, you really had to earn a playoff
and the regular
spot, right?
season really mattered.
And you didn't have losing teams in contention or even making the playoffs.
More on that.
I'm thinking this year in the National League, you'll have a losing team in the postseason as the second and or third wild card team. You'll have at least one team and maybe 2 with losing records. That's my forecast.
It's not going to happen in the American League more than likely, but in the National League, not impossible. If it were to happen right now, yeah, you'd have
Look at who the third wild card qualifier is right now in the National League. Losing record.
Losing record.
Losing record.
Yep. There's only 2 with there. The Braves are 34-25. The Padres 32-32. The Cubs 30-31. The Cardinals right behind them at 29-31. So yeah, it's entirely possible, which is kind of remarkable when you think about that argument they've had in baseball forever, the idea that that's not how the sport functions. And I get that the playoffs are where the money is at. The playoffs are where the national interest is in. Otherwise, baseball is kind of much like hockey, a regional
Baseball's
sport.
a regional sport. The only national sport is the NFL. Baseball's a regional sport. Basketball's a regional sport. Hockey's a regional sport.
We'll talk a little bit more about those later when we talk about the Stanley Cup and the NBA finals coming up as well. By the way, we'll have our friend Aarif Deen from ILA Sports join us to talk about the hockey wins, because regional is a big part of that. And we'll talk about the very nature of Canada there, and the idea that there hasn't been a Canadian team win in a long time, but it's a regional sport. It's not as if, you look at it the same thing and think, when you're a Broncos fan, are you rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl because they're an AFC team? I mean, maybe some people do, but probably not. They're the Chiefs. They're the division rivals. Them. Right. So
more likely than not.
There's not this uniform group of fans. So in baseball, it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. But for the Rockies, it feels like they're in such an odd spot. They thought they would be competitive. Of course, they're the Rockies. They always think they're going to be competitive, and they're not. This is one of the years where if they were even remotely competitive, they'd be in the mix. This is one of the years in which they're not remotely competitive, and they're going to lose 100+ for the second time in their history.
It appears that way. That's their pace at present, to go 57-105.
But the willingness to go all into the rebuild isn't there yet either. We'll find out as we get closer to the trade deadline, but of course there's no rule that you can't make trades before the trade deadline. You could start negotiating good ones as well for teams that, when you look at the tight clumps of teams in the National and the American leagues, maybe one of these teams wants to start separating things out quickly. And a guy like Diaz, who's playing very well, we talked about this before, Diaz and McMahon, your 2 best options for trade, How long do the Rockies want to hold on?
You know, the backup catcher can hit.
Stallings.
And has been a DH at times this
Right.
year. 34 years old.
Well,
You don't
and keep
think
in mind, they're
you
both
could get just a little bit of something for him. Not a lot, but you've got two catchers who are pretty good hitters.
and the idea
The problem is they're 33 and 34 respectively. Diaz is 33, Stallings
Right.
is 34. Trade one of them. But
they're both
you're
conceived to be
missing one thing.
they're
though.
keeping the
You're-
seat warm for Drew Omo, we've been told anyway, right?
You're missing something though, Sean, and you really should know better. Dick Mofford prizes loyalty, and isn't loyalty one of the best character traits you can find in a person? So he won't trade Ryan McMahon because he likes Ryan McMahon, and Ryan McMahon has been loyal to him, and Dick Mofford is more than loyal to Ryan McMahon, who I think among all Rockies is not necessarily their best player. We
Not
talked
anymore.
about this the other day. I think Tovar is. But if you're looking for all-star candidates, there are more good shortstops
Oh, yeah.
than there are third basemen in the National League. And every team has
Okay.
to have an all-star.
So maybe you
correct?
wait there. So maybe
Ryan
you'll have an all-star.
McMahon, I'm full of predictions today. Ryan McMahon
Yeah.
will be the Rockies all-star representative in 2024.
Oh, see, I feel good about that. I thought maybe you were going to say they were going to trade him after that.
No,
Oh.
he's my whole point is
Got it.
Dick. You don't understand. Dick
Got it.
Mofford is loyal to Ryan McMahon.
Because, if the All-Star game might be an opportunity to promote, say, a player on a team that most teams don't watch very much, perhaps a good performance in the All-Star game might spark that. Of course,
Well-
wait, didn't Elias Diaz win the player of the
he did
MVP of
He
the
hit
All-Star game
game-winning
last
home
year?
run, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
And the Rockies didn't do
And
anything about it.
and here's the other point. The Rockies were more than happy years ago to let DJ LeMahieu
Mhm.
go to the Yankees.
For the exact same money they give Daniel Murphy.
Correct.
Exact same contract.
Why not give him Ryan McMahon? You don't think Ryan McMahon would make the Yankees
No.
even more of a favorite to at least get to the
Yankees
World
are
Series, if not win
43
it?
and 19.
They'd be even more of a favorite. Left-handed hitter at the new Yankee Stadium, just as the old Yankee Stadium, left-handed pole hitters who hit with power,
Wow.
ideally suited.
Well, baseball has other issues than trying to figure out what the Rockies are going to do or trying to figure out how they might be able to get all of its wild cards teams to be winners. They're having to deal with the ramifications of a scandal that within its own sport, you have to go back 100 years or so, but obviously they still rattle baseball. More on that in a moment. And it's funny because we'll talk about the timing here, right? It's not okay for professional baseball players to bet on sports, but it is okay for you to do so. And over the last 4 years, of course, you've probably been hearing all the ads, seeing the ads, and hearing so many times you can get them in your sleep. Well, let's simplify it for you. We're going to give you one more, but this one's going to make it easy. So Mile High Sports has gathered all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers. They put them all on one page on the website. It's to make it easy for everybody to figure out what's the best set of bargains for you. When you're talking about getting into sports betting, what's the best offer? What's the best bonus? This can be complicated, and it can be hard to find it everywhere. You have to go search all over the place, look at each book, try to figure out what the best fit is. Well, not anymore. Over at Mile High Sports or on the Mile High Sports app, we do that. Whether it's bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, everything. It's all in one place. Easy to find. Go to milehighsports.com today or download our mobile app, and then you click on Colorado Sports Betting. It's that simple. Just think of it as your bonus from your friends at Mile High Sports. Well, we didn't really know any of the guys in baseball, Sandy, who have gotten themselves in some hot water, but the argument to be made about the suspensions in baseball for betting have a lot to do with the legality of betting. And I think that much of the media world is reading it wrong. Padres infielder Tucupita Marcano got a lifetime ban for betting on baseball. He didn't do it a few times. He did it 387 times.
He had a lot of time on his hands.
Yeah. And over $150,000 bet over the course of that span of time. The tip-off was from one of the legal sports books in which Marcano was placing those bets. Marcano, by the way, not particularly good at it, won 4.3% of his baseball bets. So for a guy that, plays it not particularly all that good, definitely not in a position to throw them per se as well. Nevertheless, baseball correctly pointed out MLB Rule 21. It's posted at every single clubhouse. Every other sport has one of similar type of energy that you are not to bet whatsoever on your own sport. So Marcano ends up getting the lifetime suspension. The Pirates talked about who he was with for the majority of the time. Said, we're extremely disappointed at Tucupita's actions. Are fully supportive of Major League Baseball's ruling. The Pirates, along with MLB, Players Association, and every club, work to ensure all involved within our game are aware of the rules and policies around gambling. While the thorough investigation revealed no evidence of games being compromised, influenced, or manipulated in any way, protecting the integrity of our game is paramount. The Padres pointed out specifically, we can't comment on violations that occurred outside of our organization. We'll continue to educate members of our organization regarding the obligation under the policy. The suspension of Marcano is not the only one that was handed out, although it was the only lifetime ban, and it's the first time since there was a lifetime ban all the way since 1924. Jimmy O'Connell,
because he made the bets. Wow. He was a Major League
while
Baseball
he was a Major
player,
League Baseball player,
as opposed to others who have made it while playing in the minors.
Right. Jimmy O'Connell in 1924 for the New York Giants, the last guy to receive a lifetime ban. Of course, Pete Rose agreed to the lifetime ban in 1989 after he had bet on the Cincinnati Reds while being the manager. But they was not the only person getting in trouble. Michael Kelly was declared ineligible for a year for betting on baseball while he was in the minors for the A's. And 3 different minor league players were also suspended for a year for betting on major league games. Jay Groom with the Padres, Jose Rodriguez from Philadelphia, and Andrew Salfrank from Arizona all got a year. And of course, we can touch upon the idea of Ippei Mizuhara, Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, who pleaded guilty now to bank and tax fraud charges in federal court yesterday, stemming from betting debts as well. Baseball and the Dodgers were very fortunate to have Ohtani not get wrapped up into that at all. Make of that what you will, but Mizuhara gets hit on it too. But here's the thing about this, and the idea you'll hear from the people who pick the low-hanging fruit, Sandy, is they'll say, well, see, this is the problem with gambling. It just makes it, and see, all these guys are going to gamble on games. Okay, here's where you're wrong. And here's where they're missing it. Marcano was reported by the legal sports book in which he placed his legal bets as a citizen, not as a baseball player. It's against the rules of his employer, but okay from where he was. That's how he got reported. When you talked about these other guys, Kelly and Groom and Rodriguez, Salfrank, guess who they got reported? From the actual sports book. You go back to the Jonte Porter issue with the NBA. Where did he get caught? The actual sports book. Ioma Uwazurike, the Denver Broncos, still on suspension. Last year with the NFL, got suspended. Guess who turned him in? The sports book. What's happening is the legality of this, much like alcohol during the Prohibition, it's happening, but legalizing it is now making this big data possible, and the people who are doing the wrong thing are getting caught because it is now legal, and there are mechanisms in place to bring it above ground instead of underground. It reminds me of the NIL world in college football. That was happening all the time. No one had a way to track it. No one had a way to pay attention to it. It's part of the reason that it's happening now. You bring it into the light, and most of the roaches scurry. And the ones that are dumb enough to get caught out in the light, they get squashed. And that's what happened in this case.
Well, I'll push back just a little bit on that. And this is from USA Today on this very subject. Major League Baseball's reckoning with legalized sports gambling has only just begun. Now the only questions are how deep it will go. And it's easy to get, maybe to turn your phrase around, the low-hanging fruit. These guys are minor leaguers, borderline major league players. It's easy to suspend these guys, to ban them for life. But the only questions now are how deep it will go and whether more prominent players will be ensnared in gambling on their sport. And The writer continues, in case you didn't know it by now, it's true, the apps are in the clubhouses. MLB isn't wrong in crediting the cooperation of legal sports books in catching the players running afoul of Rule 21. If nothing else, it confirms what we learned from college and the NFL gambling violations that preceded this one. It's pretty easy to catch wrongdoers. But it also crystallizes a modern reality where a player can dial up his FanDuel account one moment, then amble into the training room to see who's hurt the next, to place a seemingly harmless and MLB legal bet 1 second and compete for 9 innings moments later, and to exist in a bubble where even the simple act of watching another MLB game on MLB TV will be accompanied by an incessant wave of FanDuel commercials, the music set to take me out to the ball game, imploring viewers to bet over-unders and other items.
Yeah.
Players are viewers too. And the technology is such that they can do these things.
That's true.
And that it's very easy to do. And yes, the guys who aren't prominent are probably a little more careless about it, particularly if in this case, they're basically career minor leaguers who hail from another part of the world and probably aren't making a whole lot of money, but have a tendency to think, well, I can make more money by gambling. And if I get caught, I don't know if that's the rationalization for this fellow, but if I get caught, what have I really lost? I can't play baseball anymore, but I'm a fringe player. And
how come, I mean, I think I know the answer, but I mean, how come baseball has to take the lumps for this more than any other sport? Baseball has minor leagues, multiple levels of minor leagues.
Mm-hmm.
The NFL doesn't. The NBA, I guess, does now have a level. Hockey has a little bit of the levels. But baseball's the one that apparently is always the most in trouble because of it. You know, when it happens to baseball, people freak out as if it's inherent in the culture. Even when the number of players suspended in baseball, when you're talking about the percentage of players who are actually playing are smaller than the NBA, smaller than the NFL. Why does baseball have to take the brunt of this? I mean, is this all from the Black Sox scandal that no one is even alive to remember anymore? Really? I think that in that regard, it's a little unfair. The point that the USA Today is making is 100% true. But you could replace baseball with football, basketball, hockey, and have the exact same sentences. There's no changes whatsoever. The way to fix it is this way, especially with the guys in the minor leagues. Think about the way in sports where they've bubbled up. In hockey, for example, right? I'm not talking about gamble. I'll talk about other things. When you talk about face shields, when you talk about helmets being mandatory, you made it mandatory at the minor league level of hockey, and then all of a sudden it works its way up. And after a little generation or two, everyone's always had them, and it's not weird. When baseball went to the mandatory ear flaps, and then the opportunity to make other changes within the sport, a couple generations in, everyone's always done it that way. It doesn't matter. The idea in this case is when you actually, these guys, Groom and Saul Frank and Michael Kelly, okay, maybe they're not big fish, but they get thrown out for a year, or Marcano gets suspended for life. A couple generations in, players are going to realize, wait a minute, that's not worth it. Look at the fallout in the NBA alone from Jonte Porter's scandal, right? Jonte Porter was admittedly a fringy guy last year.
Also a
fringe player. True. But the fringe player in the NBA
makes more money.
Makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
And are you going to gamble on that? I mean, if you're in the league at all, why are you going to risk it up for that? You can make so much more money, exponentially more money. Yes. Is it a concern at the minor league level where some of these guys realize they may never make it? It is. But again, you're also talking about the small fry. And I'm not saying to ignore it, but I'm saying you do have to put it in perspective. And I do think it's unfair that baseball gets more flack for this than everybody else. And I'm not really sure why, except we're literally going back 100+ years and saying that's the problem. Because this is a concern everywhere. And again, we're celebrating the wrong thing. The fact is, people are getting caught, and the leagues are getting out in front of it because, as weird as it sounds, it's worse if it doesn't. It's worse for the sports books. It's worse for the sports themselves. It's better for everybody if the folks who are doing what they're not supposed to do get caught. They're not going to, and especially, look, if you're the sports books, I don't care if you are Shohei Ohtani, who didn't reportedly bet. Okay, fine. Shohei Ohtani could throw in, if he felt like it, $1 million bets. Sure. Do you know how much the sports books make? That can be a rounding error. It's not worth it for them to take those numbers, even from a superstar, and not rat them out, because losing the actual partnership with the league would be far more damaging. It actually greatly incentivizes the sportsbook to watch it and make sure that they turn in anything out of the ordinary when it comes to the sports betting from potential players. And so I get that it's a problem, but I think we tend to look at it and say, oh no, it's this new problem that's being completely created. It's not a new problem. It's the same old problem. What we're realizing is we have new tools to actually nip it in the bud and catch the bad actors earlier because it's legal.
Okay, but it does further expose the hypocrisy that has long been there. And now you have this,
and that's a different
going
argument.
on.
Sure.
You have a dance
And every
going on
league is doing
now
it.
where integrity of the game is promulgated, and these leagues are profiting enormously. That's why they've legalized gambling. They see
Of course.
profit in it.
Absolutely.
Well, generally speaking, the people you just mentioned are not old enough to rent a car. One guy is one, and he's basically a career minor leaguer, Kelly.
Kelly, right.
But all the other ones, 20, 21.
Right. And that's going to take education from teams.
You know, the kid who's been banned, 23.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's going to take education from teams. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. It's going to take education from teams, and that's going to be part of the equation. You're not wrong. It does the hypocrisy of it. That's a different discussion, because you're not wrong. And wait till you start seeing a little bit more. Teams are starting to do it already. Like you see over in Europe, that you can go to the game and place the bet at the game, at the kiosks that are at the game.
Mm-hmm.
You could just go up
Right.
and grab your beer and your hot dog and place a couple bets while you're up there and you're at it. That's a different discussion. But I think when these folks are getting caught, and they end up getting caught by the betting partners, that's a good sign. It's not a new thing. It's a problem. But don't make the mistake to think that it's being created by the legalization of sports betting. It's simply being more visible. It's the old idea. We'll go back to the Depression there. Pardon me, the Prohibition, and the old movie The Untouchables with Sean Costner and Kevin Costner and Sean Connery, where he says everybody knows where the booze is. The question is who wants to catch Capone.
Right.
That's really what you're talking about in these cases. And it is going to be an interesting time period for the next few years for a handful of leagues. The Stanley Cup Finals will get underway soon. A Canadian team has the chance to win for the first time since 1993. How much does that really matter? We'll talk about that with Mile High Sports' own Aarif Deen after this message from our friend, Dr. Rick Perea.
Dr. P, of course, well known around here. He does his own podcasts on Mile High Sports. You can hear him on Wellness Wednesday with a weekly checkup from the neck up at 5:30 on Mile High Sports Radio. Dr. Rick Perea is one of the premier performance psychologists in America. He's worked with world champion teams here in our own city, the 2015 Denver Broncos, the Denver Nuggets, a few years before they elevated themselves into a position of being world champion. He's worked with the Rockies going into their 2 consecutive season foray into the Major League Baseball playoffs. He helps middle and high school performers. He speaks in front of corporate audiences on a regular basis. So regardless of your station in life, Dr. Rick Perea can help you at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933. Or look him up at Dr. P at Think1 for You, the number 4, .org. That's Dr. P at think1foryou.org.
The Stanley Cup Finals will get underway soon with the Edmonton Oilers taking on the Florida Panthers. The Panthers were there last year, weren't able to close the deal. The Oilers, of course, it feels like behind Connor McDavid, this has been a matter of when, not if, they'd have an opportunity to get there. And they have, joining us now to talk about it, is the lead Avalanche reporter from Mile High Sports and the host of the Hockey Mountain High podcast, our friend Aarif Deen. You can follow him on Twitter at RunRightAarif, AARIF. And Aarif, thank you for joining us. I want to start with this. You were born in Canada. A lot of the narrative is about the idea that Edmonton could be the first Canadian team to win since the Montreal Canadiens beat the Kings back in '93. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to dispel this a little bit, because the idea that Canadian fans are this one monolithic organization that once their favorite team gets eliminated, they're more than happy to jump on a potential rival. That's not how it works, does it?
Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. We got you, Aarif.
Good. Sorry about that. I was on mute.
Good.
But what I was answering to your question is it's absolutely not that way. Obviously, there is not a fan in Vancouver that wants Edmonton to win the cup. There's not a fan in Calgary that wants Edmonton to win the cup. And it's always going to be that way. But I think in the grand scheme of things, so growing up in Canada and kind of, being very connected to several communities over there in the hockey markets and things like that, it is a big deal. Even though individual fans, like I was just saying, are not going to want to say it out loud, it is a big deal for the country to start winning Stanley Cups, because I think there's been kind of a shift, and it's the same thing you see in basketball with the Raptors. Granted, they had their 1 year with Kawhi, and we saw him walk out the door right after that. There's been a little bit of a shift in the business side of hockey, where it's almost become accepting to Canadians that it's harder to play here. It's harder to win here. It's harder to make money here. It's harder to all these things. And I think it would really calm a lot of nerves over there to have a championship there, so that when somebody so we don't have to constantly hear, oh, there's a Canadian team in the Stanley Cup Final. Well, now TNT's not going to make money, and the NHL doesn't want this, and the players, don't want to pay 40% tax. They're going to go to Nashville. They're going to go to Dallas. No, there are teams like Edmonton with star players that can win a Stanley Cup. You're hoping Toronto can do the same thing. It matters for the nation to have that, so that as UFAs come through and as all of that, the best players in the NHL, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid included, have never seen in their lifetime a Canadian team win a cup. And I think those things genuinely do matter.
I agree with you. And I think it's possible to overstate the case, certainly.
Yeah.
And create this notion that all fans think alike. But isn't it true, fairly or not, that Canadian fans, Canadian teams feel they've been undercut to an extent by the NHL generally, and particularly by Commissioner Gary Bettman, with respect to the movement of franchises? One of the stories we've talked about this year a little bit, particularly since the Avalanche played the Winnipeg Jets in the first round of the playoffs, was this odd notion that while it was so easy to move a clearly unsuccessful franchise from Arizona to Utah, and they've already got 34,000 people bidding on season tickets, that the NHL looks at Winnipeg, and maybe even Winnipeg ownership looks at that franchise's status as being relatively tenuous. And that would never happen with an American team. I mean, every effort was made for decades to preserve the Coyotes in Arizona. such efforts, I think, in the minds of many Canadian hockey fans, would never be made on behalf of a Canadian team. They just let them go. They've let the Winnipeg Jets leave before. They'll let them leave again. And that reason, I think, especially since Edmonton, unlike a lot of Canadian teams, has players who are well known here in the States, like McDavid and Draisaitl.
Yeah, so that's part of it.
Interest in Edmonton for this series.
That's part of it, Sandy. That's part of the idea that Canada has kind of, Canadian fans in general have kind of started to understand the difficulties of these markets. So here's a great example. You're always going to hear this narrative, but it was not nearly as strong this time as it has been in the past. But Arizona goes under, the Coyotes. It happens really quickly. Ryan Smith and the Utah Jazz ownership comes through and grabs the team. How little bit of noise did you hear compared to past years about, well, why not Quebec City? Because if you look at the seating chart that the Utah Jazz just sent out, there was like 30% of their building for the next 3 years is going to have obstructed seating. You can't see half the ice rink in that Utah Jazz building because it wasn't made for hockey.
And nobody cares.
Meanwhile, there's a building in Quebec made for hockey that can host the Quebec Nordiques. And it's part of this idea that, like, we are very much aware that these markets in the smaller Canadian cities like Winnipeg, like Quebec City, things like that, are not ever going to be the money makers. I think Canadians are starting to understand that. They're starting to see the numbers. They're starting to see projections for why the NHL wants to go back to Arizona, why they want to give Atlanta a third strike. And they're understanding that, like, if you own a business, if you own a franchise, you have 3 locations that make a lot of money, and you have that one location that just breaks even and keeps the community strong. And Canadian teams that are not the Torontos and the big markets are starting to understand that's what we are. And there is, a large part of that is Gary Bettman's job is to grow it in markets. And, he's kind of where I think they've been undercut is the idea that these Canadian markets are very much like Gary Bettman knows they're going to show up no matter what. So he's not going to spend any money or any time or any consideration on growing those markets because Toronto's never going to leave that franchise. They were embarrassing. Montreal's never going to leave. Before Brendan Shanahan got hired in 2014, the Leafs were a laughing stock for about a decade and nobody's going anywhere. So let's put all of our efforts on growing the Dallas, the Nashville, the Carolina. Let's grow those markets. So Canadians feel undercut that way. But to win a Stanley Cup, and I think it starts and ends with the Edmonton Oilers this year, because not only are they going for a Stanley Cup, but the best player in the NHL plays for them. Connor McDavid plays for the Oilers. We all remember the 2015 draft lottery when the Edmonton Oilers won it for the 3rd time in 4 years, and he had that face, and everybody's like, oh boy, another big star wasted in a Canadian market where the NHL can't capitalize on this. That narrative is important no matter how much these guys, these fans in Vancouver and Toronto, no matter how much they don't want to see the Oilers win. I think that narrative matters. That narrative is why I want to see them win the Cup. Patrick Waugh and the Montreal Canadiens raised the Cup 10 days before I was born in 1993. I've never seen it.
The idea in this series that Edmonton could win obviously is predicated on the notion of McDavid and Draisaitl in the offense. But the truth of the matter is the goaltending, which I think was the biggest question by far on the team, but maybe the biggest question of any goaltending of any team in the playoffs, has somehow managed to stabilize enough. Do you think Edmonton has enough to go toe-to-toe with Florida, or does it have to be a situation in McDavid and Draisaitl and company kind of catching lightning in a bottle a handful of times?
It's pretty much got to be that, but you know what? They just did that against the Dallas Stars. Like, they caught lightning in a battle. It's a 2.5 week long series. It's usually a little bit less than that, but because of the long travel, they're going to have an extra travel day between every set of games for games 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then 5, 6, and 7. So it's 2.5 weeks. Play your best. Nobody in their right mind 2.5 weeks ago thought the Edmonton Oilers can do what they did to the Dallas Stars. Yes, they lost, they beat them in 6 games. Yes, they were down 2-1 in the series, but there was a shift in game 4 where they took over, and I think they outscored Dallas the rest of the way. It was 11-2. They were down 2-1 in the series until the moment that they won The Western Conference, it was an 11-2 score difference. They completely took over that series, and nobody expected that. If you ask me right now, which team is deeper, I'll tell you the Florida Panthers. Which team has more experience? Of course, Florida Panthers. Although Chris Knobloch yesterday, the Buffalo Bills were catching stray bullets with his comment of, go ask the Buffalo Bills what Super Bowl experience means to them, when he was asked if the Panthers being in the Super Bowl meant anything, or sorry, if the Panthers being a season ago, if it means
more than 30 years ago.
Yeah. The last time, really quickly, the last time an NHL team has made the cup 2 years in a row and lost it 2 years in a row was 78-79, the Montreal Canadiens. It's been a long time. So it's very, very rare if the Panthers lose this year to accomplish the terrible feat of making it to the cup final 2 years in a row and losing both times. So the Panthers are deeper. They have the experience. But all Edmonton needs are 4 wins out of 7. And you know, it's the reality of the game of hockey. Like right now, when you look at both rosters and the contracts and the depth they have, and even the young talent they have, like Florida Panthers, I would bet money that they would win more games over the next decade than the Edmonton Oilers. They're set up for a repeat a lot better than the Oilers. But all it takes is 2.5 weeks. And when you have 2.5 weeks where McDavid and Draisaitl and Bouchard are playing the way they are, the defensive structure has finally figured itself out enough to shut down the Dallas Stars. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be difficult. Alex Barkov has shut down tons of great players in this playoffs, and now he's got the hardest.
He might be the best two-way player in the league, at least best two-way forward.
I wholeheartedly would agree with that. And I think, you know, McDavid's going to be his toughest challenge, but you just got to win 4 out of 7, and nobody's going to ask about next year. Nobody's going to ask about last year. Nobody's going to ask about Ken Holland, or nobody's going to ask about Stuart Skinner, whatever the heck's going on with Jack Campbell. All that matters is 4 out of the next 7. I think the Oilers can do it. It would not surprise me.
It's remarkable. We pointed this out the other day, but there has been a Florida team in the Stanley Cup Finals now.
Crazy.
5 straight years.
Crazy.
And that, again, gets back to Bettman. That's the flip side.
Yeah, that's the opposite,
where
right?
Bettman took a gamble and made a commitment, putting multiple teams in the state of Florida, and Tampa Bay and Florida made a payoff out of Sunrise, not exactly a bustling metropolis.
Yeah. It's, I mean, a lot of people, if you hear the narrative from salty hockey fans in any other market, it's the lack of local state tax, but it's a lot more than that to me. I mean, it's building a team, and we've seen this with the Colorado Avalanche. We've seen this with the Edmonton Oilers. Getting star players is one thing, but you got to put the right guys around them. You know, Nathan MacKinnon in 2024, we all saw what he did. Mikko Rantanen this year wasn't even as good as he was last year, where he scored 55 goals and then 7 in 7 games against the Seattle Kraken. Still was not enough. Cale Makar is going to be a Norris Trophy finalist until the end of time for his NHL career, and it still wasn't enough. You have to put the right guys around them, and we've seen the Oilers slowly figure it out, slowly put it together. Or sorry, not the Oilers, the Panthers slowly figure it out, slowly put it together. They drafted guys like Barkov and Ekblad, but they went out and traded for guys like Reinhart and Bennett, and they went out and gave Sergei Bobrovsky the huge, crazy contract in 2019.
Right.
That's building, you know, the team. That's building a team to compete for a Stanley Cup. Obviously, all of that is bookended by the massive trade that they made for Matthew Tkachuk, which was acquired by a guy that they drafted 3rd overall in Jonathan Huberdeau, 1 spot after Gabe Landeskog, like another huge draft pick. And, you know, Avalanche fans might not want to, or might not remember this, but this is the same Florida Panthers team that, quote unquote, was screwed by the draft lottery because they should have gotten Nathan MacKinnon. They dropped from 1 to 2. The most fortunate thing the Avalanche ever had was winning the draft lottery that brought them up to 1st to get MacKinnon. So they had to settle, and I use that word lightly, for Barkov, but still found a way to build around him. So, you know, it could be the Florida thing. It could be the Bettman thing. But, you know, the big thing with these markets, you're going to see it with hopefully the rise of another Arizona team, hopefully another Atlanta team. Pittsburgh about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was almost going to get sold and moved to Hamilton. But it takes a good team to build a market more than anything. Obviously, you need the demographic, you need the population. These cities have it. It takes a good team to build a good market. Now that the Panthers have a good team, we're going to see them rise, in my opinion, the same way we saw the Carolinas, the Nashville, these non-traditional hockey markets, because the players they have on the ice are just so exciting to watch.
Yeah, it ends up taking a good organization to make a good team, and that's the biggest part of the equation for these squads, and the one in Florida in particular, the way they've put it together. He is Aarif Deen. Make sure you follow him on social at Run Right Aarif. That's AARIF, and listen to the Hockey Mountain High podcast whenever you get a chance. And as the offseason coming quicker than expected and free agency will be upon us, you want to make sure that you follow everything that Aarif is putting together. So give him a follow and make sure you check him out on milehighsports.com and the free Mile High Sports app. Enjoy the hockey. Thanks for giving us a little bit of a taste there, and especially that perspective from the Great White North. Appreciate it, my friend.
Yep. Thank you so much. I'm excited to watch these next couple of weeks, and then draft, free agency, everything's coming quick. So it's going to be fun for the Avs.
It does. It will come quickly. Thanks so much. The first couple games of the Stanley Cup Final will happen on Saturday and Monday. Of course, both of those in Florida, 110 points on the year. The Panthers are the home team in that. For as much as that has mattered in these playoffs, top to bottom, I guess it's good to start at home, but that's an interesting part of
road
the puzzle
teams have a winning
as
record.
well. Yes, and we'll get to more on the idea of how valuable that is in the NBA in just a moment. But I want to remind you, especially if you're thinking of Saturday, maybe you're thinking of nice weather. We were going to maybe grab some friends, maybe watch the Stanley Cup Finals, get a little hockey in there, watch some sports on television. That's okay. Well, you might want to entertain. Well, if you're going to entertain, I got the spot you're going to want to go to and go ahead and feed all your friends, and you can enjoy watching whatever you wanted to watch. With warmer weather here, it's time to get together with those friends and have some fun. When you entertain, you don't get to be enjoying the party. So we can help you with that. That's what you need. Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Rolling Smoke does a terrific job with all of it. They're outstanding type of barbecue. Love it here. Love it. The folks here have a lot of the Rolling Smoke here. We have it at the place. I have it myself. Go pick it up. The honey bourbon sausage is a favorite. And of course, can't go wrong with the hot link or the brisket or the burnt ends. But whether you have a half dozen folks or 50 or more putting together a party, you can pick up the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 different locations. In Aurora, inside the Stanley Marketplace, that's the original. You can go to Golden, inside the Golden Mill, at the corner of Dry Creek and University in Centennial. That's where I end up going. And now the newest location, open on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. And if you're headed to a show at Red Rocks, you can find them there too. Don't go get a hot dog or something like that. If you're going to get something to eat up there and enjoy your concert, go try some barbecue and go try the best. Go get some Rolling Smoke up there at Red Rocks. And then when you're back in town, then you can go ahead and get it for all your friends and be the host with the most when you get all your barbecue from Rolling Smoke. Easy to find, Rolling Smoke Barbecue, and online at rollingsmokebbq.com. Sandy, the NBA Finals are underway tomorrow, with the Boston Celtics, who everyone expected to be there, given the flat paved Eastern Conference, and the Dallas Mavericks, who nobody expected to be there. And over the last couple of years, what I kept thinking about today, and it's something that I think is intriguing. How much does the regular season actually matter in the NBA anymore? Are we getting close to the idea with the NHL, where the idea is you just want to be peaking at the right time, you want to have the hot goalie, you want to have everything clicking at the right time? The NBA, to a certain extent, now with 6 different champions in 6 years, depending on who wins this, either way, it's 6 different one. 5 years in a row, the defending champ's gone out, not in the finals, not in the conference finals, in the second round. How much does the regular season really matter in the NBA?
I think it depends a little bit on the conference. And we pointed this out the other day. Boston's been really good.
I mean the Mavericks were 5th. The Heat last year were the 8th.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, Boston won 64 games this year.
Went 37-4 at home.
You have to go back 6 years to find a Houston team that won 65 games. It was as good as Boston was this year. And Boston's been in the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
The one year they weren't, 36-36, they kicked Brad Stevens upstairs and brought in Udoka, actually, to coach. And now Joe Mazzulla is the head coach. But Boston's been good all year, and they've been dominant all year. They're playing in the weaker conference. So if you combine that with all the injuries, and part of winning championships is avoiding injury yourself and watching
and getting
other
a little
teams.
lucky, right?
But even with Boston, you can't ascribe their success strictly to other teams losing key players, because Boston for the last 2 rounds has played without Porzingis, and they've been dominant without Porzingis. Now, they really need him in this series against Dallas in order to win. He will not only have to play, he'll have to play well. But Boston, Basketball Reference ranking overall, a simple rating system, they call it SRS, first in the NBA, and they've been that way virtually the entire season. First in offensive rating, third in defensive rating, naturally first in net rating overall. Dallas, 13th in the simple rating system, 10th on offense, 18th on defense, although about a month before the season ended, they were down in the mid-20s defensively. They've really improved defensively, even at the end of the regular season. The net rating is 14th. On paper, this looks like a mismatch, but you have in Doncic and Irving the kind of backcourt that I don't believe has ever really existed. You've got a guy who in the playoffs in Irving who averages 25, 5, and 5. 25 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. And then you've got Doncic, who is putting up close to triple doubles in the way that Jokic has been doing in the playoffs.
And they've done it all year. Irving in the regular season, 25.6 points per game, 5 boards per game, 5.2 assists per game. Doncic in the 70 regular season games, 33.9 points a game, 9.2 rebounds, 9.8 assists per game, and 1.4 steals per game.
But it hasn't been that much different in the playoffs. And the other difference is they brought in Gafford and P.J. Washington at the trade deadline.
Now they got some grit.
Lively's come alive.
Big bodies.
So as a 1-2 punch at the center position, Boston remembers when during maybe the greatest single season of all time, 1985-86, for a particular team, Boston won the title that year. Bill Walton was the 6th man of the year, the late, great Bill Walton. Robert Parrish was the starting center. Has there ever been a better center combination in the NBA Finals than Robert Parrish at that point, at the peak of his career, and Bill Walton, a healthy Bill Walton who played 80 games that year? Well, Gafford and Lively give Dallas that kind of 1-2 punch. And Porzingis and Horford aren't bad on the Boston side either. Dallas has gotten deeper as a result of those trades. They traded for 2 guys who are now starting, right? Along with Jones, of course, who's a specialist, Doncic, and Irving. So Dallas is deeper. Boston gets Porzingis back. That means Horford comes off the bench and gives them a legitimate, with Pritchard and Hauser, 3-man rotation coming off the bench. So but both teams are equally deep. I think this is a much closer series than people might expect. And yes, Dallas only won 50 games, but Dallas, including playoffs, is 28-7 in its last 35 games. There's nothing flukish about Dallas being here. The only team over that stretch that's been even close to Dallas, even nearly as hot, has been Boston. And Dallas is much the desire. I mean, look at what Boston got a break because they're in a weaker conference, right? In a certain respect, they've still been dominant. Dallas had to go through the Clippers, higher seed, Oklahoma City, the number one seed, and Minnesota, the 3 seed,
who looked like the best,
who won 6 more regular season games than Dallas won.
Yes, on top of the 2 seed and
so
defending
you
champion.
Can't say that they played softies or they lucked out in getting here. Even as the 5th seed, they've beaten 3 of the top 4 seeds to get to the finals. They are a legitimate opponent, and they can cause Boston a lot of problems.
It feels
especially if they win 1 game in Boston.
Yes, because it feels as if they're getting better as the playoffs go along.
Yeah,
it feels that the idea between the creativity of Doncic and the unstoppable nature at times of Doncic, as well as Kyrie Irving's extraordinary ability in the clutch, guys, a textbook ice water in the veins, which is something, quite frankly, that as good as this Boston team has been over the last handful of years, when the things have gotten really tough, this Celtics core, Porzingis notwithstanding, has generally failed to meet the moment so much that Celtics fans have a lot of consternation about it.
But they've still been able to make key trades.
Yes.
And add on. And Porzingis is the latest example of what they added on that they didn't have a year ago at this
What
time.
if he's expected to play? What if he's not really right? How much of a problem does that create for Boston?
I don't think he plays if he's not really right. I mean, they're 12-2 largely without him. I know he played in the first.
And I think
They're
they kind
12-2
of understood
largely
they more or less had it without him.
Yeah.
And they didn't probably have to push him, which is a luxury that, that Boston had.
Listen, look at this long layoff between the conference finals.
Oh, I know.
And the NBA finals. I can't believe that he isn't close to as much as just about anybody else is close to 100% at this time of year. And I think even if he's not completely healthy, his value to Boston is another 3-point shooting threat.
Right.
And that's Boston's
can't block a shot because he's an order.
Boston's the best 3-point shooting team in basketball.
And that's the interesting part of this, because when you look at the series and try to break it down, what you're talking about is we're talking about in a make it, take it league. This is a 3-point shooting series. These two teams shoot the three, and they make
Dallas
the
shoots
three.
the corner threes as well as anybody. And that's where you bring in a PJ Washington, who as a corner 3-point shooter is dangerous. And if the Celtics try to defend, let's say with Porzingis, accounting for his injury, and they say, okay, we'll put you on PJ Washington or Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Those two guys can hit corner threes.
Right. And then you'll have to find a way to, Porzingis can't float and can't do all the things that he wants to do. So it'll be interesting. To me, obviously, the best player in the game is Doncic, who is scintillating in virtually every way. I think you talked about it a little bit last week, the idea that Luka Doncic is probably, maybe even win or lose, the face of the NBA going forward.
Might be.
And
he signs going up against Anthony Edwards, not necessarily head-to-head, but in the last series, that maybe we're jumping to conclusions about Edwards and Doncic a little bit too soon, because Doncic was incredibly dominant when he had to be. He met the moment. He met several moments.
And he's done that.
Conference final series.
To me, that's the intriguing part of it, because we know Irving's ability to hit the clutch shot. It is extraordinary, and it's happened throughout his whole career. Now the fact that Doncic has become borderline unstoppable. I mean, look at the final 4 games against the Minnesota Timberwolves. 3 triple doubles, and not the teeny tiny ones. We're talking 30+ points in each and every one of them, and 10+ boards. This is a guy that's a backcourt player. And the creativity is every bit as good as Nikola Jokic's. And he has the one type of shot out of the backcourt for a guy that can slash that's indefensible. He is as good a shooter, the floater, as anybody who's ever played the game.
He's the best.
Ever.
He's the best at the floater. And the other thing is, how many unimaginable shots does he seem to make? And unimaginable passes. Jokic is the only guy who makes you just
wonder what you just saw.
Slack-jawed by what you just saw in terms of shooting and passing. Doncic, Jokic's close friend, can match him that way.
It'll be a fun series. Of course, that gets going tomorrow in Boston, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. Want to thank Aarif Deen for joining us to talk a little bit about the Stanley Cup playoffs. Make sure you give him a follow at Run Right Aarif, AARIF, and check out the Hockey Mountain High podcast, as well as everything he's putting together with the Avs, because he pointed out the offseason is coming quick. Free agency, the draft, it's all happening really fast. So give Aarif a follow. Danny Bailey's the man in the booth that makes everything work here. But you are the one that brings it to life for tuning in. So thanks for watching it. Thanks for listening to it. We appreciate it. We will be back next time, but we're going to step aside for now. For Sandy Clough, I'm Shawn Drotar, but you can keep it right here at Mile High Sports.